In the late 1670s, at a time when Virginia's backcountry was still scorched from the flames of Bacon's Rebellion, and when England itself was still reeling from decades of civil war and religious turmoil, a young man named John Stevenson quietly arrived on the shores of the Chesapeake. His story begins not with a great deed or daring act, but in a legal transaction, a sale. On October 27, 1677, in a formal document, his mother, Christian Stevenson, gave her consent for her 21-year-old son to be sold into indentured servitude so he could cross the Atlantic. She confirmed that John had reached his maturity the previous May, but even at this age of adulthood, he could not afford his own passage. The contract, practical yet painful, ensured that he would arrive in Virginia with the means to settle his late father, John Stevenson, the merchant's estate, but at the cost of his freedom. The ship that carried him was the Anne, under the command of Captain Benjamin Cooper, sailing from London to Virginia at a moment when the colony was still in chaos. Just a year earlier, poor farmers, freedmen, and landless servants had rallied behind Nathaniel Bacon, rising up against Governor William Berkeley and the entrenched elite. The rebellion of 1676 had been suppressed, but it left behind scars and suspicions. In its wake, colonial leaders cracked down. Laborers were watched more closely, punishments became harsher, and racial divisions were hardened to prevent future uprisings. Into this tense world stepped young John Stevenson, not as a planter or a merchant, but as a servant, one of thousands whose labor built the wealth of early Virginia. By February 10, 1678, just a few months after arriving, Stevenson appeared in the records of Isle of Wight County. There, he sold a tract of land his father had once purchased, a property that had passed through several hands since its original grant to Epaphroditus Lawson, and at one point held by William Clapham. In a colony where land ownership meant everything, John was doing what he had come to do, begin managing his father's affairs. But he was still not free. Just months later, on September 11, 1678, Stevenson ran into trouble. A local official named Robert Griggs testified that John, then serving as an indentured servant to Lieutenant Colonel John Carter, had run away for 14 days. The court punished him with 28 extra days of service, a standard double penalty. This moment is telling. It was likely John's first attempt to reclaim autonomy in a system that denied him control over his own labor and movement. This event took place just as Virginia's elite were tightening their grip. After Bacon's Rebellion, the colony passed new laws to prevent solidarity between white servants and enslaved Africans. The gentry feared rebellion more than anything, and young men like Stevenson, rootless and frustrated, were the kind of men they feared most. And yet, Stevenson's name began appearing in more ambiguous places as the year went on. On October 5, 1678, he was listed in association with woolen cloth and kersey goods, common English exports in the Atlantic trade. Between October 14th and 23, his name appeared again, this time in shipping records of the Anne, freshly returned to Virginia. Though he was still technically a servant, these records hint at something more, a lingering link to his father's mercantile past. His late father, also named John Stevenson, had been a significant merchant planter in the region, exporting tens of thousands of pounds of tobacco during the 1670s. Tobacco, of course, was the lifeblood of the colony, and by the late 17th century, it fueled not only Virginia's economy, but also the vast wealth of English ports like London and Bristol. Young John may have arrived as a servant, but his father's name and legacy seem to have placed him at the margins of trade, even before his freedom was secured. That freedom, however, would not come easily. On February 12, 1678-79, the court ruled that because John Stevenson had arrived in Virginia without a signed indenture, he would be bound to serve 7 full years. This was a devastating blow. Under Virginia law, those without written proof of a contract were automatically classified as laborers, and at 21, John qualified for the maximum term of servitude. His efforts to secure his inheritance had bound him into the very labor system his father had once used to amass wealth. Still, he persisted. By April 3, 1680, records show that John Stevenson purchased 150 acres from John and Sarah Wakefield. This was a turning point. Land ownership in 17th century Virginia was not just about farming, it was about status, freedom, and economic independence. With his own land, John could now begin growing tobacco for himself, rather than for the profit of another man. In September 1682, his name appeared again, this time as one of 7 headrights listed under Roland Buckley's land patent near Currawaw Swamp. While it's not clear whether Buckley truly transported John or simply claimed him, it formalized John's official presence in the colony, a kind of bureaucratic finalization of his transition from immigrant to Virginian. And around this time, his personal life began to settle as well. Sometime after 1684, John married Elizabeth Edwards, daughter of Charles and Mary Edwards, a respected family in Isle of Wight County. This was no small step. Marrying into a reputable planter family offered not just companionship, but social standing, alliances, and access to kin-based networks that governed much of colonial life. Throughout the 1690s, John Stevenson's name became a regular fixture in local legal records. He was now no longer being judged in court, but called to testify, witness deeds, and serve as a neighbor and peer. On April 29, 1690, he witnessed a land transaction between John Shearer and John Britt. In June 1694, he was summoned to testify in a dispute between Nicholas Wilson and Captain Robert Randolph, a sign of his involvement in community affairs. Though when he failed to appear, the court fined him. It was a small penalty, but one that showed he was now expected to participate, not be punished. And on October 1, 1695, he appeared again, witnessing a power of attorney for Anne Jacobus to sell land, evidence of his continued engagement in property and legal matters. In just under 2 decades, John Stevenson's life had transformed. From a servant who ran away to a landowner, merchant, and respected neighbor, his rise reflects a broader reality of 17th century Virginia, a place where the line between bondage and freedom was often narrow, but where opportunity, however brutal, existed. Many who came to Virginia during that era never made it. They succumbed to disease, accidents, violence, or poverty. Their names are lost, their graves unmarked. But John Stevenson's legacy survived, not in grand estates or political office, but in the records of everyday life. Land deeds, court entries, and marriage alliances. His is the story of a man caught between 2 worlds, between servitude and freedom, between the ambitions of his late father and the burdens of his own generation. And in navigating that world, Stevenson did what so many in early America aspired to do. He endured, he adapted, and ultimately, he belonged. In the tapestry of early Virginia, his thread may be thin, but it is strong. A quiet but enduring testament to the resilience of those who came with little but built lives all the same. As always, thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about American history, please like, share, and follow.